So I'm Caitlin Birch, global economist, as Andrew said, at the EIU. So I'd like to introduce and invite up our panelist, Ulrika Bessert, who's the Chief Human Resources Officer for Inca Group, IKEA, and Jason Sadler, President of Cigna International Health. Come on up. You have your pick of seats. So we've heard a really interesting start to the day, and I've loved the first two panels or chats talking about all the exciting innovations that are happening, may yet happen, and what's coming down the road. We're going to put that all in context and maybe bring the tone down just a little bit, talking about the cost of living crisis. There's so much innovation that's happening, but of course, we have to remember that at least in the next 2 years, that's all going to be happening in the context of major economic and stemming from those societal pressures. So we're going to work through in this panel how companies can not just survive, but thrive in the midst of this cost of living crisis that we're seeing. Now, as a global economist, we're looking ahead, doing a lot of thinking about what that cost of living crisis is going to look like, and I think we're thinking about it in at least a 2-year time limit. We're going to have inflation being uncomfortably high, at least probably until late into 2024. So it is something that's going to be factored into, I think, decision-making processes for a long time. But we're excited to see what could come from this in a positive sense, not just dealing with the crisis, but seeing what opportunities, perhaps for innovation, there could be there. So let's perhaps start out with a scene-setting question. Let's start with you, Jason. How are you seeing that cost of living crisis play out in your workforce, but in your company and sector more broadly?
Yeah, so for the last 9 years now, Cigna has done what we call our Global Health 360 survey, where we interview about 10,000 people, different countries around the world, how they're feeling about their physical health, social health, financial health, family health, and also health at work. And for the first time this year, we saw concerns over financial health come right to the top. Here in the UK, 55% of people surveyed said that their financial pressures, they believe, were having a direct impact on their physical health and just their ability to stay healthy. So, I mean, to me, that's a really sort of big warning signal. The situation is even worse outside the UK, where we're seeing 65% having concerns that financial challenges are impacting on their ability to stay healthy. And the problem is even more astute amongst the younger population, particularly under 30s as well. So there's a real issue there.
Yeah, we've seen, especially for the US, rising debt levels and increased pressure on finances, particularly among younger members of the labor force. Ulrika, let's perhaps just see how that's playing out in your sector, your labor force.
Maybe just to set a little bit of context, that we are in 31 countries, 170,000 co-workers, and I can just echo what you're saying, that we see financially it's actually really hitting our co-workers. And it's not only the crisis we're into now, it has been for a while. So it started with COVID, we have the war in Ukraine, we have had availability issues as well, and now we have the cost of living and energy crisis. So I think we really need to recognize that it is hard times for co-workers. And then we as a company and employer need to think, how can we best support? And at the same time, how do we keep a balance so we are responsible also as a company long term? So it's actually a dilemma sometimes to handle, to be a good employer and actually really securing the future.
So yeah, being across 31 countries does add to the complication slightly. What sort of measures have you put in place? How have you reacted, if you will, to that crisis, or perhaps proacted to guide your workforce through that practically?
I think that is one of the keys, is to listen to the co-workers. And as you said, when you operate in 31 markets, you need to also be adaptable depending on specific market needs. But the first thing we have done is to really look through our compensation and benefit package. Do we pay in a fair and decent way? So that is the starting point. And we can see that that importance is increasing. What we have also done is to do one-off payments, meaning with something we call in Sweden is called uppskatta, that is appreciation. So we paid out one extra bonus for 110 million euros. And then we also established a social fund, because what you see in this crisis is that the most vulnerable group of co-workers are the ones who's mostly affected. So therefore we have established this fund where you can actually apply for money. Then now I'm talking mostly about the financial part, but what we experience is that the mental part and psychological part is also dramatically increasing in the company. So people are more worried. And I think everyone is listening here, when you have financial problems, of course, that adds stress. So you need to look at this on a holistic way and actually really not only have one solution.
Yeah. Jason, from your perspective, what sort of moves have you made or thinking about to address that?
Yeah, so again, a lot of similarities from a Cigna perspective. Again, obviously, we want to ensure that we pay our people fairly, so ensuring that we get the relevant market data to be able to benchmark appropriately. Similar to IKEA, though, again, here in the UK, we did make some additional what we'd call off-cycle special payments to help with what we knew was a growing sort of pressure, particularly on some of the more junior employees, which have felt this sort of financial challenges the most. But I also would, want to call out, the mental health challenge as well. Even before COVID, through our annual surveys, we saw, the growing trend of mental health, people's awareness of it, and also growing desire for employers to actually help them with their mental health challenges. And again, that bloomed during COVID. From a Cigna perspective, last year, recognizing the importance of that, we launched our own, what we call the 5% challenge, where we encouraged all of our managers, leaders to commit to allocate 5% of their time to supporting their colleagues, their sort of teams with mental health challenges that they may be facing, helping them sort of identify where somebody might have a mental health challenge, and sort of not only giving them the moral support, but also pointing them in the right directions in terms of when they can get help. Very pleased to say that sort of challenge has been extended and taken up by a number of our clients here in Europe, and also it's also been sort of rolled out now in the Middle East and Asia. So it's one step, but I mean the role that the employer now has to play in terms of taking care of their employees is greater than it ever was.
Yeah, that was a good slip of the tongue. It's not just pay.
Yeah.
It's a lot of other things, and I think you're absolutely right. I remember just from being in these sort of conferences talking about business innovation over the course of the last 3 years, there's been a really dramatic shift in terms of what employers are talking about, and again, bringing the mental health conversation into the day-to-day, not just as a one-off. Ulrika, I believe you have a background, maybe in a previous life, as a counselor. So yes. How does that inform your strategy, your kind of workforce?
I think it's to build actually what you just said, that not only looking at the financial part, it's very important. So let's not make that small, because people really need to survive. But then it's to really focus. So what we have done, which is actually coming from my background, is that we have run a campaign that we call Are You OK?, where we are really addressing the barriers and maybe also the biases against mental health, where we want to create a culture where we are much more transparent, where you can bring your full self to your work. We are really trying to thrive on equality, diversity and inclusion. I would say also that, and that we started during the COVID, is that we have done the greatest investments ever in leadership to build the muscle on resilience, because we believe that if you have knowledge, it's actually creating less distance. And sometimes we also need to recognize how it is to be human, and as humans we need to have contact with each other and really avoiding the feeling of being lonely. Because when you're sitting in a country and you're a leader, you might feel, let's say you're sitting in Korea, and you might feel very, very lonely. And if we then can build a community, which we have done, where you can be allowed to raise your concerns, your dilemmas, your everyday issues, and you can hear voices from colleagues, how they have worked around it, I think that has been one of the learnings. But from my previous experience as a counselor, I think it's also to be hands-on, concrete, and not only talking, but actually go into action and support in the best possible way.
Yeah. Let's maybe come back to pay for a second, because as you mentioned, this is kind of the core, if not the entirety of the issue. And something that we're thinking about a lot as economists is, of course, the self-fulfilling prophecy that can be inflation and inflation expectations. Now, companies have a big responsibility here, often an uncomfortable one, that as wages rise, prices tend to rise. The more that companies and workers expect that rise to be continuous, it can sometimes then become embedded in the system. We have that entrenched inflation issue that we keep hearing about. How are you thinking about this issue, Jason, your responsibility in responding to your workforce and perhaps not fulfilling a problem that could become rolling?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a real challenge. I mean, again, much of the data that you get is historic to start off with, and then people are seeing headlines. They're seeing it when they go out shopping that, you know, prices are still rising. At the same time, going back to what you said, you know, we don't want to make this almost a self-fulfilling prophecy and constantly adding to that. So we're trying to strike a balance, to be perfectly honest. Yes, we want to pay our people fairly. We want to retain our employees as well. But, you know, and at the same time, you know, we don't want to add to the inflationary pressures by constantly passing on those pay rises to our customers and clients as well. So it's tough. It's a real balancing act, and you know, it's trying to be a responsible employer and do the right things for your employees, but also ensure that you've got a sustainable business going forward as well.
Yeah. Ulrika, thoughts about how you're thinking about that, factoring that into
I think it's actually a dilemma, and we are trying to look what is good long term and short term, what is good for the business and what is good for the people, and having those four in mind. I like the previous speaker talked about being innovative and really taking height in your culture. We are a culture-driven company, so that helps us a little bit in navigating. But the innovation part is that we have looked at our compensation and benefit as a basic, and then we have done one-off payment. Then we have asked the countries to really be creative, so we are doing transportations, lunches and dinners, finding other ways to support co-workers than only increasing the salary in line with inflation, because that might not be responsible long term.
Yeah, interesting. And again, bringing that innovation piece back into a crisis again. How have you found that to work? I know we're kind of early on into the cost of living crisis, more or less, but have you gotten good results from that? Any lessons learned from those more innovative solutions?
Yeah, I feel that at least when we are, because we're doing a co-worker service and we're getting good results from the way we are showing up, then we always can be better. So I'm not trying to say that we're doing everything perfect, but we believe that looking at this holistically, the financially, psychologically, and also the physically, and look at that on a totality, but then also find other solutions, we have found that quite beneficial. And at that same time, then we can also have control of the cost situation and still help our co-workers in the best possible way. So I think that is maybe the new thing also, to be more adaptive in the reality, in the business reality. I'm even questioning, we're talking so much on crisis, but I'm saying now it's crisis after crisis after crisis. Maybe we should stop talking about crisis and instead seeing this is the new reality and how to operate in the best possible way.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to frame it. Otherwise, we're just going to keep bouncing from one to the next. Jason, how have you found kind of the response to any measures you've put in place?
I think the most important thing is listening to your employees. Again, we regularly go out and survey our employees. We run regular engagement surveys, you know, understanding what's most important to them. I mean, you know, we can't sort of, you know, walk away from, you know, everybody's feeling the financial pressures, and you know, we do need to sort of address those, but at the same time, there's other issues and other challenges that they're facing, and you know, like I said, a growing expectation that the employer should be there to support them. I think another important thing to recognise is it's not just your employees that are facing challenges. You know, many parents now have got kids with mental health issues, other sort of family members that they know are struggling with this. So, you know, and an employer's ability to provide the right support, you know, through, you know, employee helplines, assistant lines, giving access to counsellors that can help. People really do appreciate that, to be perfectly honest. They realise that, you know, they're part of something more than just a 9 to 5 sort of environment.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's really interesting, the idea that it's a multifaceted issue. I won't say crisis, that's good, we should move away from that. And the listening piece is probably really critical moving forward as much as it is today. Thinking about some of the positives, how are you thinking about kind of opportunities here to if not boost, continue to develop employee loyalty, even customer loyalty, if you may be thinking about that from a different perspective. But as the cost of living crisis rumbles on, how does that impact kind of in a positive sense? What opportunity do you think there is here to boost that engagement, both internally and externally? Maybe Jason, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd certainly say through the customer and client lens, we definitely want to partner with them. We don't view it as a sort of one-off transaction. We view it as a relationship, and thereby, understanding what challenges they're facing, what's important now, what's important sort of longer term, and trying to come up with creative solutions, be more innovative in terms of, addressing their broader set of needs. That's what we found has proved to be really successful. And, I think, it's one of the reasons, like, many of the employers that we work with around the world, we've had relationships with them for 10 plus years sometimes, and it's because they view it as a partnership, and I think that's really important, and that comes back down to the importance of listening, understanding, and then trying to actually address what's really important to them.
Yep. Ulrika, from your
It's probably my answer also, really understanding your co-workers' needs. So when we have had discussions with our co-worker, but also our service, shows that we have very clear understanding why you choose to stay at IKEA. So our co-workers say that they get energy from the vision, that we are purpose-led, possibility to grow. Specifically, the culture is probably the main reason, the way we are in relation to each other, but also that we are very strong on equality, diversity, and inclusion. If I'm looking at the more challenging side, the compensation will always come up, I believe, because it's an important factor. But what we see now is that our co-workers actually request much more flexibility in when to work, how to work. So the scheduling part is something very important for us. We also see that our co-workers says we need more time with our leaders to have more discussions, and then it's the reskilling and upskilling. So what we have done is to really slice those challenges and really decided that we want to make a movement. I actually personally are quite positive that we as an employer need to be even better to keep our workforce. And so far we see actually a positive trend on our staff turnover, so slowly it has increased, which is very positive in the environment we are operating in, specifically knowing about the great resignation that you see in the world now. So it's really to be focused on your co-workers.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about the specifics around some of those flexibility things that have worked or not worked, or what are you thinking about next? You mentioned scheduling, kind of location of work, or even upskilling. Any kind of good best practices that you want to highlight out of that?
And the previous speaker talked about test and try. And it's innovation again. So for instance, I was just visiting one of our stores in Germany, and there they, on a free basis, so mean voluntary basis, they were testing to work 4 days per week and to find new flexibilities because of the commuting. Not all our co-workers can work from home. We are serving customers, and the customers comes to the store very often. So that is one example, that we need to find new ways and not being too academic or theoretical, but test and try. But also when it comes to our people planning, we are having a system now where we as an employer are deciding this is the contract you're getting and this is when you want you to work. So we're trying to look what would the opposite mean, meaning that the co-workers can actually decide more, this is how much I want to work and this is when I prefer to work. Then of course it's legal components in this that we need to understand and specific per market. But we are really now into testing and trying. I think maybe that is the most important message, to test and try. And then if I'm looking at reskilling and upskilling, since we are really into the journey of becoming an omnichannel retailer, it means that some jobs do disappear, but we see many new jobs is actually developed. So at the moment we are having 60,000 co-workers that need reskilling, upskilling, and that is also a way to keep co-workers because many wants to be more skilled.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win actually.
Yeah, interesting. lots of new partnerships in that area as well, I'm sure too. Jason, from your perspective, any best practices in terms of that pivot to what employees are looking for?
I think just picking up on what Ulrika said, one size doesn't fit all. And again, I think it comes back to understanding your different groups of employees, what's most important for them. Going back to sort of innovation that we were talking about previously, the best innovation does happen by people being physically together and brainstorming and stuff. So, and I think, during the pandemic, there were challenges around that, although again, we were able to do a lot virtually. So I think really understanding what's most important for your different employee groups and trying to adapt accordingly, and also recognizing that you're going to have to continually evolve because it doesn't stand still and these needs change. I think one of the most alarming facts is, we realized we had thousands of employees who had joined Cigna during the pandemic and had never met physically any of their work colleagues, which is, and again, when you come back to culture and the importance of, feeling that you're part of a company, if you've never met your work colleagues, as good as Zoom is, how are you really going to feel that connection and that bond? So again, there's a lot of things to think about here, and I think you've got to continue to innovate, test, learn, and continue to sort of evolve.
Thinking about that, and again, the idea that it's, at least in the last few years, one crisis after the next, or one business environment after the next. How are you thinking about the kind of near to medium term? What areas are you looking to innovate in, or what are you seeing coming down the pipe? But how are you preparing for the next crisis or the next environment? I'll say, Jason, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, so nobody could have envisaged the global pandemic, despite all the scenarios that you run, the black swan models, etc. I don't think anybody would have called out that type of event, and I think we've learned an immense lot through that. I mean, the agility, the flexibility, the pace at which business has adapted, not just in terms of remote working, but many businesses were able to evolve their whole business model, just recognizing the different environments. So, yes, we can continue to plan for different sort of scenarios, but the reality is we don't know what the next crisis is going to be. And I think it comes back to the importance of that agility, flexibility, just willing to sort of think in a different way. I think that is going to, be most important in terms of being able to overcome that next crisis, whatever it is.
Yeah. So a whole company with their sneakers on, as our Chief Innovation Officers noted so wisely this morning. Ulrika, what about you? What are you preparing for in the next crisis?
Firstly, I think in general we have a quite positive outlook on the possibilities and opportunities that we're holding. But what we have learned and what we see is to really focus on building the muscle of being more adaptive. That historically you can plan change in a quite controlled way with plans and cause and effect. That still works partly, but what we see is that we as leaders must be much more adaptive to take the situation when it comes. And what I see typically what you can do as a mistake as a leader is that you run into action directly, specific when it's in a heating moment, while the technique is actually to up on the balcony and look at the dance floor to understand your real problems and then lead from that. So I think the adaptability is the key, and actually build the muscle as an organization to handle those kind of situations. And resilience is the key word. Yeah. And then from a human side then is to help our coworkers and ourselves to be more mental prepared and building the resilience to lead in uncertain times. So I'm always saying that sometimes we now lead with more questions than answers, and we're leading much more in the unknown and trying to be more comfortable in not having all the answers, I think is one of the keys.
Yeah. So maybe sneakers or dancing shoes is the right metaphor for the day. Now, I want to make sure we have some time for questions for the audience. And just a reminder that you can put those questions into Slido, and the code for today is 3362737. So please do put those in if you like, or just pop your hand up and we'll bring around a mic for you. We've got one question right in the back. Perhaps we'll start with you.
Thank you very much. I would like to point my question or remark to one aspect, and that's regional disparity. We have currently run at our institute some models on regional vulnerability towards green transition, digital transition, industrial transition, and trade dependency. And the picture is very bleak. The future is simply showing that there will be few winners across Europe regionally, but there will be a lot of losers, and the social political impact will be pretty dire. So my question was whether this sort of regional disparity across Europe is something that you take into account. Thank you very much.
Yeah, really interesting. Who would like to take that first?
I mean, I just say from my own experience and running a global business, I mean, you know, regional disparities are something that we've had to live with, you know, for many years. I mean, you know, we used to have a business in Turkey. I mean, they've been living with, you know, hyperinflation for like the last decade. I mean, it's norm to them.
Yeah.
I used to visit every quarter, and you know, again, every quarter they'd have a new crisis. So you know, I think you know it's really important that you know, whilst the world is definitely much more connected than it ever was, still the differences as you go from region to region are really significant, and you have to really understand those and adapt accordingly.
And the listening piece, comes in again. Ulrika.
And my answer would be that we can see that equality, I'm not only talking about the gender equality, equality in the totality, that is actually stalling in the world. I believe we as companies need to step up and doing more and really taking height. What do you believe in as a company, and what can you do to support? I think that is super important now. I also believe that the way we show up now will be remembered. So it's a choice as an employer, who do you want to be? And that goes in both equality, fair and equal, and also on the sustainability. And my personal view, you don't have a choice as a company. So you need to step up and actually contribute in one way, you can say, to a better world, because a not equal world is not good long term.
We've got one from Slido, so maybe while the mics make their way around to the next question, I will bring this one up from the screen. And the question is, how do you measure the impact of your initiatives, the ones you've put in place in recent years? Jason.
Yeah, so employee turnover to me is a really important one. You know, and again, it comes back to not just you paying people at the right level, but are they really, you know, engaged? Do they want to be part of your company? And definitely, I mean, I think all employees during the sort of pandemic and certainly last year saw sort of turnover levels at levels they've never seen before, as you know, people, you know, in many instances decided to do something totally different or even check out of, you know, the workforce altogether. So that's a really important one to me. Again, employee satisfaction, employee engagement numbers, again, to me, are really important sort of indicators in terms of whether we're getting it right.
Ulrika, I imagine turnover in retail is naturally high.
Yes.
How are you looking at these?
So the first one we're measuring is actually customer happiness, and we can today see a direct correlation with our co-workers' engagement and how the customer is perceiving us as a company. So that is something we're doing absolutely regularly. Then we do an annual co-worker survey where we ask lots of questions, and then we do specific. So after COVID, we asked all our co-workers, how is it? How have we actually lived up? And we have never had better engagement index than after COVID. But it's a constant work, so listening, asking, and measuring is our solution. Yeah.
Okay. I think that probably is it for the time that we have for today. We could have gone for much longer, I know, but thank you both again for your time and all of your insights. And yeah, we'll get through these next couple of years, eh? Great. Thank you, everyone.